principal piece in this session will be a presentation by the two authors of this report, and it will be followed by a question and answer session. But before we get to that, we are graced today with the presence of the two heads of the agencies that put together this report, and they would like to make some opening remarks before we begin. So I will turn to the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Maria van der Hoven.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar for the launch of the 2015 edition of the Technology Roadmap on Nuclear Energy. We are pleased to have worked together with the Nuclear Energy Agency on this joint roadmap, and would like to thank NEA for their collaboration on this publication. Now, ladies and gentlemen, looking back, it has been almost 4 years since the disasters of Fukushima and Daiichi, and in the aftermath, a number of world governments reacted by phasing out or banning altogether nuclear programs. And there was a sense that the age of nuclear energy was drawing to a close. Yet that has not come to pass. In fact, at the start of 2014, 72 reactors were under construction across the globe. And this marks the greatest number of reactors being built in 25 years. And nuclear energy remains the second largest source of low-carbon electricity worldwide. And indeed, if we are to meet our collective climate goals, nuclear energy is critical. In fact, to efficiently meet the target of limiting average global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius, global nuclear capacity must more than double by 2050. So simply speaking, to make the transformation of our energy sector a reality, we will need to use all low-carbon energy sources available to us, including nuclear energy. And at IEA, we believe that each country must decide what energy mix is optimal for its national circumstance. Nuclear energy can play a key role in decarbonizing our electricity system by providing a stable source of low-carbon baseload electricity. Yeah, and its advantages in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, competitiveness of electricity production, and security of supply make it an important technology for the secure, competitive, and sustainable energy sector. Of course, we know concerns must be addressed, and there is an obvious need to address anxieties about safety, regulation, and waste management. But this is not an impossible task. It's rather a task that requires taking a step back and looking at the various strengths and weaknesses of nuclear power and charting a clean and a clear path forward. And this new roadmap, which is an update of the 2010 Nuclear Energy Roadmap, takes that new look at the future of nuclear energy. It offers a new vision of the best ways to accomplish a more rapid uptake of nuclear power worldwide, and takes into consideration the many changes since 2010 which have impacted both the outlook for nuclear and the energy system as a whole. The roadmap complements the nuclear analysis which was presented in the World Energy Outlook, which highlighted what considerations should shape decision-making in countries using, pursuing, or phasing out nuclear power. Technology can and must play a central role in helping us move forward towards a low-carbon energy future. Governments and industry must work together to accelerate innovation now and reshape investments towards low-carbon technologies. So today's launch of the Nuclear Energy Technology Roadmap is an opportunity to reflect on this critical role of technology and explore some of the actions we need to take to transform our energy system. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Bill Mackwood, Director General of NEA.
Thank you, Maria. Well, it's been a real pleasure for the Nuclear Energy Agency to work with IEA on this roadmap. I've appreciated the cooperative effort and the hard work of the staffs of both of our agencies in preparing this document for joint publication. The authors are to be congratulated for their work. As a group, NEA member countries represent over 85% of the world's installed capacity of nuclear power plants, and our work benefits tremendously from the knowledge and experience gained from the decades of technological development and plant operations. The advanced thinking that arises from this deep foundation of expertise will allow us to plan for a better and brighter future. Clearly, a part of this better future is reducing the environmental impacts of large-scale energy production. Many of our member countries and close partners such as China and India look to nuclear energy as a part of that future. As many of the world's nations look to make significant reductions in carbon emissions in the coming decades, it will be important to consider new advanced technologies. That is the central motivation behind this roadmap. As Maria mentioned, the IAEA's 2-degree scenario shows that nuclear energy can play a major role alongside other low-carbon technologies in helping nations around the world meet their environmental goals. The roadmap presented here today gives a comprehensive overview of the nuclear technologies at play, those both of today and those under development for tomorrow. But this isn't purely a technical document. It also contains many recommendations in the area of licensing and regulation, financing, education and training, and public acceptance. Research and innovation are key to ensuring that the technologies needed for the future are being developed today. That's why, as a follow-on to the roadmap released today, the NEA is engaging with its members to define a new nuclear energy research innovation agenda, which will help identify the gaps in current research programs and chart the science and technology efforts that are needed to pave the way for that better, brighter future that we all seek. Again, my thanks to Maria and her team for their cooperation and hard work, and I hand the floor back to the moderator.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks that set the scene for the launch of this publication. I'd just like to make a couple of points before we turn to the presentation and remind all of you that are tuned into this webinar that the report and the annex of the report with all the case studies and the presentations will be posted on the IEA and NEA websites, so you can access them there. And following the presentation, we will have a question and answer period. And you will see on your screens a capability of typing in the questions, and please do so as the presentation proceeds along, but we will wait until the end of the presentation to entertain those questions. And now I will turn to the two authors of this report to make the presentation of the report, beginning with Ms. Cecilia Tam of the International Energy Agency, followed by Alain Payer of the Nuclear Energy Agency.
Thank you very much. The IEA's Roadmaps program is a development based on the flagship Energy Technology Perspectives series. This publication has a scenario which looks at the role of technologies in transforming our energy system. The underlying scenario is our 2-degree scenario, which looks at the mix of technologies and measures that we need to reach a halving of global energy-related emissions by 2050 compared to current levels. This will allow us to limit global temperature increases to just 2 degrees Celsius. I'd like to highlight that these scenarios are not predictions, but really a scenario which outlines what is a least cost pathway for achieving our ambitious goal of decarbonizing the energy system. The IEA has been developing technology roadmaps since 2009 in close collaboration with governments, industry, and research stakeholders. The roadmaps are developed with an aim of identifying an implementable strategy that can accelerate the development and deployment of a given technology. To date, we have completed 20 such international roadmaps. And this roadmap today that we're releasing is an update of our earlier nuclear roadmap, which was released in 2010. Since that document was published, we've had a number of events which have significantly impacted the outlook for nuclear, but also the energy system as a whole. First, the Fukushima Daiichi accident had a significant impact on energy policy and public acceptance, leading to increased safety evaluation and upgrades. And within the energy system, the development of unconventional gas and oil, as well as the global economic recession and weaker growth, has led energy prices to fall. Recognizing these changes, the IEA and NEA undertook a process to update this very important roadmap. This edition of the nuclear roadmap really aims to outline what is the current status of nuclear technology development, what are the R&D needs to address increased safety requirements, as well as to improve the economics and competitiveness of this electricity source. We also aim to provide an updated vision of nuclear's role in this low-carbon energy system. The document identifies barriers and actions needed to accelerate the development of this technology. Before I go into details of the roadmap itself, I'd just like to take a few minutes to explain the IEA's roadmap program and its process. The roadmaps aim to provide international guidance on how the development and deployment of a given technology can be accelerated. Our roadmaps go beyond just the R&D or technology breakthroughs that we need, but also try to identify major aspects required to increase the uptake of a given energy technology. Hence, in addition to technology-specific milestones, our roadmaps also look at identifying major policy, regulatory, market, financial, and public acceptance barriers which need to be overcome to really maximize the potential of a given technology. We work closely with stakeholders from government, industry, research, and the finance community to develop our roadmaps, engaging as widely as possible with those stakeholders to identify what we need to do to accelerate technology development. The roadmap that we are releasing today was developed through the support of over 200 experts who participated in one or more of our 3 stakeholder workshops. They also supported us in the development of case studies and helped to review our publication. An important feature of this update includes the development of 16 case studies which highlight good practices in a wide range of activities, from reactor construction, waste management, financing, as well as supply chain issues. Now looking at the new vision for this roadmap. This vision is based on the 2015 edition of the Energy Technology Perspectives, where we see that in order to decarbonize the electricity system, we will need by 2050 to deploy 930 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2050. This would represent 17% of total electricity generation worldwide. While this is slightly lower than the vision that we had identified in 2010, it is still quite a formidable challenge, meaning an increase in the share and the capacity of nuclear of about 2.3 times. Achieving this in just 35 years will be quite challenging. If we look at the regional details, the largest growth in nuclear will be in China, where we expect nuclear to reach a capacity of about 250 gigawatts by 2050 under this 2-degree scenario. This will mean that China's share of electricity generation from nuclear will rise from just 2% today to nearly 19% by 2050. If we look at recent developments in nuclear additions, while we have today a record number of reactors under construction, if we look at the number of construction starts, they have dropped significantly from 10 in 2013 to just 3 in 2014. We see some improvements in terms of new grid connections of 5 gigawatts in 2014 compared to 4 gigawatts in 2013, but unfortunately this is still less than half of the 12 gigawatts we need to add each year over the next decade to reach our 2DS targets. Unfortunately, nuclear is not on track at present to reach these very ambitious goals. Looking at the role of nuclear in terms of emissions reductions, under a scenario where the power sector needs to be virtually decarbonized around the world, nuclear will continue to play an important source of not only electricity, but particularly low-carbon electricity. Its predictability makes it an extremely attractive option for providing zero-carbon baseload power. And since 1980, an estimated 60 gigatons of CO2 have been saved from nuclear electricity generation, and that's compared to if we had produced that power from coal. This is nearly double the current energy-related emissions. And looking out to 2050 in this figure, we can see that nuclear generation will represent worldwide 13% of all emissions reductions in the power sector. And in countries such as Korea and in the EU, nuclear could account for nearly a quarter of all emissions reductions that we need to see in the sector. Building up such a high share of nuclear capacity will represent significant investments in the long term. Our scenarios estimate that over $4 trillion will need to be invested in nuclear to 2050. These investments will occur both in OECD countries and in major emerging economies such as China and India. China will account alone for about a third of new capacity to 2050 and would account for about a quarter of the overall investments that we need to see in the long term. The roadmap identifies that one of the biggest challenges that nuclear faces is in raising the sufficient financing for making these investments. The financial crisis and slowdown in global economic growth has led to a sharp reduction in the availability of affordable long-term debt. While we see sufficient capital in the financial markets, changes in financial regulation requiring banks to hold more capital has led the banks to reduce the availability of funds for large capital-intensive and long-term projects such as nuclear. Governments have a key role to play in ensuring stable long-term investment frameworks are present to allow capital-intensive projects such as nuclear to be developed. To overcome some of these barriers, a commitment and stable strategy for nuclear development is crucial. Predictable long-term electricity prices that provide an adequate return on capital will be central to developing bankable projects. In liberalized electricity markets, financing is even more challenging, but we are seeing mechanisms such as the UK's Contract for Differences, which is similar to a long-term power purchase agreement, helping to overcome some of these uncertainties. The roadmap also identifies other financing models such as Rosatom's Build, Own, Operate model and the Mankala cooperative model used in Finland. Central to the IEA's roadmap are actions and milestones within the document. This figure before you here shows just a portion of the recommendations in this publication. But as you can see, they cover quite a wide spectrum of topics, from developments needed in reactor technology to fuel cycle developments, as well as regulation and finance. Within the roadmap, we identify which stakeholders need to be involved, as well as when each of these milestones need to be achieved. I'd like to turn the floor over to Henri, who will take us in more detail through some of these milestones.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. So just looking at the technical content of the roadmap, namely the technology evolution that we're looking at, we're using this picture from the Generation 4 International Forum, which shows that over the period 2010-2050, we will be looking at both existing fleet issues, Generation 2 reactors, as well as new build from today, Generation 3 reactors, which will likely be the workhorse of nuclear power generation throughout the century. And several decades from now, but from 2030 onwards, we're likely to see the first deployment of Generation 4 reactors. We're not addressing in this roadmap fusion reactors, even though we do say a few words about it, because there is probably no commercial fusion power reactor which will be in operation before 2050. So we're concentrating on fission reactors in this roadmap. So in terms of evolution, what we need is certainly to address the challenges for each generation of reactors. In terms of the existing fleet, following the Fukushima Daiichi accident, a number of safety reviews were done in the world's operating reactors, which found that most are operating safely, but some safety upgrades are necessary. These investments are being made today, alongside some investments for long-term operation of the existing fleet to 50, 60 years, or possibly more in the long term. In terms of the Generation 3 reactors, what we're seeing today is the experienced feedback from first-of-a-kind projects, in some cases with some construction delays and budget overruns. But this feedback should lead to design simplification, standardization, improved constructability, modularity for some designs, and overall a supply chain optimization. And in the end, this should lead for the nth-of-a-kind reactors to cost reduction and to vendors building on time and to budget. We're also seeing possibility of a new kind of fission reactors, small modular reactors, especially light water reactor technology-based small modular reactors coming into the market. But the roadmap identifies their specific market as being more the niche markets, being small grids or cogeneration applications. And in those specific markets, SMRs could be competitive against other technologies than nuclear. But of course, the overall competitiveness of SMRs will depend on their construction rates and also on carbon prices. I mentioned on this slide operation aspects. Light water reactors or nuclear reactors in the future will not operate in the same way that they have been operated in the past. There will be changes in the operating conditions. For example, electricity grids with high shares of variable renewables, which will demand more flexibility. Climate change aspects might come into play, in particular with respect to cooling of those reactors, and stricter environmental regulations. So there will be a need to adapt the designs to meet new and evolving requirements. Generation 4 reactors will come into play later in this century, especially fast neutron reactors. Currently, the resource optimization is not a driver because of the situation of the uranium market, but fast neutron reactors could offer an alternative route to waste management in the future by reducing volume and long-term toxicity of the ultimate waste. And there is R&D ongoing, including the design of prototypes and construction of those prototypes in the next decade. Finally, cogeneration, non-electric applications of nuclear energy. These have a high potential to displace fossil fuel usages and reduce carbon emissions from those applications. And there's a wide range of applications that are possible: district heating, desalination, process heat hydrogen. Some of them are proven applications with nuclear, but they haven't reached a very large share of the market. And there is a possibility also to offer energy storage facilities in future low-carbon energy systems. But there are many issues to address for these applications: the business model, the public acceptance, and licensing. Turning on to the next slide, we have a number of recommendations that you will find in the roadmap. And I will not read in detail those recommendations, but we're recommending governments to recognize the value of long-term operation to maintain low-carbon generation capacity. We recommend also vendors to optimize Generation 3 designs to improve constructability and reduce costs. To open up the market for SMR reactors, we believe government and industry should work together to accelerate the development through the launch of construction projects. And similarly, for Generation 4 reactors, there will be a need to have support for R&D and prototype development to demonstrate the advantages of these new designs. Turning on now to the nuclear fuel cycle. Uranium supply is more than adequate today to meet high demands up to 2035. This is the conclusion of the Red Book, which the NEA and IAEA published last year. In terms of enrichment, the roadmap identifies the potential for laser enrichment to reduce costs, but there is no say, real driver right now to develop this technology at industrial scale. There are some developments in the area of fuel, in particular following the Fukushima Daiichi accident, the development of accident-tolerant fuel, but this is still decades away. It will require a lot of research and development and qualification before it comes into industrial use. In terms of waste management, the roadmap really recommends that strategies for managing high-level waste through deep geological disposal should be implemented, whatever the route, whether it's direct cycle or recycling routes that are used. And the wait and see is not an option. Because it takes time to implement a deep geological disposal, there is also a need to address extended storage, but this is not an alternative to deep geological disposal. In terms of optimizing waste management, there are a number of possibilities to do that through recycling, in terms of optimizing resource management, for example, MOX fuel, but also improving the conditioning of waste. And further progress is expected in the future with multi-recycling with fast neutron reactors and industrial scale demonstration of minor actinide-bearing fuels in fast neutron reactors or targets in dedicated burners. We're also seeing the concept of so-called plutonium burner, for example, the PRISM reactor, and other types of cycles. For example, in China, spent nuclear fuel from light water reactor being recycled in CANDU reactors. Coming to the recommendations associated with the nuclear fuel cycle, we recommend that investments in mining should be developed, continue to develop to address long-term demand. Governments should continue to cooperate to discuss international fuel services as a means to secure the development of nuclear power. Governments should ensure that policies are in place for long-term storage and disposal, including deep geological disposal of high-level waste. And studies should be carried out to ensure that extended dry storage of spent nuclear fuel satisfies the highest level of safety and security. And research in recycling technologies to reduce the volume and toxicity of high-level waste should continue. This roadmap, compared to the 2010 roadmap, has a longer section on decommissioning. We see that it is often perceived as an unresolved issue comparable to waste. Even though it is not necessarily so. There is the issue of the cost of decommissioning and adequate funding. In 2014, the World Energy Outlook mentioned a figure of $100 billion for the decommissioning of 200 reactors. This is about $500 million per reactor. This is actually the order of magnitude that specific funds are being accrued to. The issue is not so much the cost, but the fact that adequate funding and funds are being set aside to address this decommissioning. The technology to decommission exists and can be further developed to reduce the cost, for example, increased use of robotics. And also it is fair to say that the newer designs take decommissioning into account at the design stage, so to facilitate the disassembling of components. And also, the whole decommissioning sector is a brand new sector that will offer a lot of opportunities in terms of jobs and industry. So the main recommendation for governments is to ensure that dedicated funds are set aside for these decommissioning activities, and that there is a sufficient funding to cover these operations. The roadmap also, of course, following the Fukushima Daiichi accident, has a special focus on safety and all the measures that were taken after the Fukushima Daiichi accident. In terms of research and development, certainly there is a lot more research being done on severe accidents to improve understanding, to develop better assessment methodologies, including probabilistic safety assessments, to reduce conservatism. These enhanced safety requirements will also probably impact the prospects for long-term operation, meaning that there will be increased demand for safety upgrades or equipment upgrade to face both improved safety requirements and long-term operation. The roadmap really emphasizes the importance of having strong and independent regulators throughout the world, including in the newcomer countries which will develop nuclear power in the next decades. We also recognize from the point of view of industry a risk of over-regulation in terms of multiplication of regulatory requirements, and certainly there is a need to better coordinate and harmonize safety requirements for a more efficient regulation. Safety culture needs to be enforced across the whole of the nuclear sector and at all levels of staff. And this is certainly a very strong message that we're carrying in this roadmap. We had several case studies explaining also the importance of peer reviewing among regulators, the post-Fukushima safety upgrades, safety reviews, for example, were peer reviewed, but there's also, from the point of view of operators, an important role of peer reviewing, such as performed, for example, by the World Association of Nuclear Operators, WANO. Training and capacity building is one of the challenge and the key barriers to the development of nuclear power. In nuclear countries, the main challenge is to replace the retiring workforce in the coming decades, and in newcomer countries to fill in the positions that are required both in the nuclear power operating business as well as in the regulations. And there are many initiatives to identify the needs, skills, the human resource requirements, and to set up education and training schemes. And mobility, mutual recognition of skills and diploma are being further accelerated. And we also recognize the role of research and development to attract and train young researchers and engineers. Public acceptance is also and remains a key issue, especially after the 2011 accident in Japan. And it is also particularly sensitive in non-OECD countries and in newcomer countries. And the roadmap stresses the importance of providing adequate communication, targeted information on the risks and benefits of nuclear energy. To conclude on this presentation, we've identified a set of key actions for the next 10 years. Cecilia showed that right now nuclear power is not on track to meet the ambitious targets of the 2DS scenario. And there are a number of recommendations and actions that can help put nuclear power back on track. First of all, there is a need to offer the same level playing field in terms of policies to all low-carbon technologies, and that's a matter for electricity markets. Industry has a share of the responsibility to build on time and to budget, from the first-of-a-kind reactors to the nth-of-a-kind reactors. Enhancing standardization, harmonizing codes and standards, and from the regulatory point of view, harmonizing regulatory requirements are also needed to help accelerate the deployment of nuclear energy. There is a need to continue to share information and experience among regulators on one hand, among operators on the other, to improve safety. Public acceptance must be strengthened, and information about how operators are implementing post-Fukushima safety upgrades, the availability of fact-based information, neutral information on the advantages, the benefits, and the risks of nuclear energy is needed. and waste management remains a key issue, and there is a need for those countries that have not yet implemented such long-term strategy to develop such a strategy for the management of radioactive waste. As we mentioned, the roadmap is already available for download, both the IEA and the NEA websites. We're going to take questions now. If we're not able to answer all the questions, you have email addresses here that you can write to, and we'll address those questions in the coming weeks. I'll hand the floor over to you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Henri, and thank you very much for the presentation. Lots of information there. And on the other side, lots of questions coming in. So we'll turn now to a few of those questions. And the first one to Ms. Vanderhoven is, how does the work of the International Energy Agency and the Nuclear Energy Agency overlap?
The answer to that question is relatively simple. We do not overlap because we have different and complementary mandates. When we look at the IEA, we cover the energy sectors. We cover all energy sectors, all technologies, and we see to it that we bring them into relation, and we show, for instance, when we talk about nuclear, what the role or the contribution of nuclear can be in developing energy security of supply in the future, and how to decarbonize the electricity sector. But we don't look at it from a very, very technical point of view. That, again, is something for the NEA, special nuclear energy. We do cooperate, and for the roadmap, for instance, we cooperate with the energy technology perspectives, the World Energy Outlook, the nuclear sector in the World Energy Outlook. We cooperate when we are doing our in-depth reviews in which the NEA experts participate for countries which have developed important nuclear programs. So what we want is we want to cooperate with specialized areas because, you know, we have to overlap. We have to avoid any overlap, and that's exactly why we are doing this presentation together.
Okay, thank you for that. Question for Mr. Magwood. Which organization can take the role of forcing energy to decommission old nuclear power plants?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, let me back up a bit because I think it's important to emphasize that there are different views across the world on what constitutes an old nuclear power plant. In some countries, the lifetime of nuclear power plants is a matter of policy, is legislated. In some countries, for example, 40 years is considered to be an absolute limit, and after that the plant would be decommissioned. In other countries, there is now discussion of plants operating into their 80th year. There really is a variety of opinions about this. I think from a technical standpoint, it is certainly possible to continue to upgrade and refurbish nuclear power plants that allow them to continue operating safely for a long period of time. The answer to the question, which organizations are in charge of shutting down plants, it really is a different question from country to country. The regulatory authorities in each country are charged to carry out the policies of those countries. In some cases, it means shutting plants down sooner. In other countries, it means assuring that they're safe and allowing them to operate for long periods of time.
Thank you very much for that. Another question from the webinar listeners. What is the role of the nuclear industry to work with organizations such as OPEC to provide stable energy prices?
This is a very intriguing question, especially in the time of very low oil prices. But actually, the answer is quite simple. It's none. And I think we have to be aware of the fact that when we are talking about stable energy prices, we are talking about market fundamentals. And then we are talking about supply and demand. We are talking about the energy mix. And there we can see a responsibility for energy security, which means stable, sustainable supply of energy. That is in government's hands, and it's up to industry to deliver. And I think it's also in government's hands to develop the right policy, for instance, to de-risk the problems or to de-risk investments, especially in this kind of technologies where they are very much exposed to a fall in electricity prices in the large share. We're talking about typically up to 50% of the total lifetime costs of nuclear power plants are committed at the date of commissioning. So this is something that has to be taken into account by the policymakers, by industry, but also by the financial institutions.
Thank you very much for that answer. Interesting question indeed. Another one, what are the current financial mechanisms that are being used to support investment in capital intensive projects like nuclear power plants?
Well, in the case of nuclear plants, there are a variety of mechanisms used in different countries. In some countries, there's no mechanism at all. It's simply left to the market and allow the free market to decide whether nuclear plants are good investments or not. However, there are some countries that are looking at mechanisms such as loan guarantees. In some countries, you've seen that be very helpful. Other countries, power purchase agreements, different types of supports for prices. There are a variety of approaches, but I think that for the most part, they all come back to how the risks of a nuclear plant are distributed. Are they taken by the people building the plant or by the ratepayers who will pay for the plant and buy the used electricity? And that's really what all these different mechanisms are designed to do, to try to redistribute some of those risks. And I think that any of them can work. It depends on what the policies of the country in question are.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. Other questions that have come in. Is research, prototyping, and development of Gen 4 schemes dependent on development and experience from deployment of Gen 3 and small modular reactors? If not, is there current progress toward Gen 4?
Okay, I'll take that question. There is ongoing research on Generation 4 reactors, international collaborative research, especially in the under the Generation 4 International Forum, and this is long-term research. What is happening right now is that there is some interactions with the regulators on safety requirements and what would be the safety requirements of these future Generation 4 reactors. But so Generation 4 reactors will benefit from say, the progress made and increased safety level requirements of the Generation 3 reactors, but they're on a different development track.
Okay, thank you. Another question, in the roadmap, it's mentioned that decommissioning is a very important issue. Hundreds of reactors will be decommissioned by 2050, and this will cost a huge amount of money. Who is going to pay for that?
Okay, I can take that question. Indeed, it's a fact that in the coming, let's say, 2 to 3 decades, most of the reactors which have been built in the 70s, 80s will reach the end of their lifetime, and then they will enter their decommissioning phase. This means that there will also be an enormous work to be done, which will also involve people there in the process. Now, there is a lot of discussion ongoing on what would be the cost of decommissioning of a nuclear power plant. We are engaged in NEA for the moment into a review of indeed what would be the cost of the decommissioning, and it's true that we see a variety of approaches in analyzing the cost of decommissioning of a facility. But basically, out of the numbers that we have today on the table, and if we really focus on what I would call the hard decommissioning activities, which means dismantling, dismounting, not talking here about the management of spent fuel or the very long-term geological disposal of the spent fuel of the high active waste, which then is another issue. If we really focus on the decommissioning, an order of magnitude of the order of let's say $500 million US, plus minus 30%, is something which seems reasonable at the time being, which for sure is a high figure if you take it like that. But if you also compare it to the overall numbers of the value of a nuclear power plant and of the building of a new nuclear power plant is something which is not dramatic and which can be managed. What is important is to make sure that the proper funding mechanism is put in place during the operation of the plant, that there is a secured way to set up a fund which is basically has to be filled by the payment of the electricity which is provided with a fraction of the price of the electricity, to ensure that when the plant is stopped, there is enough funding available to finance these decommissioning activities.
Thank you very much for that response provided there by Mark Dufresne of the Nuclear Energy Agency. Another question, among the possible barriers to the kind of rapid buildup of nuclear generating capacity that's envisioned in the roadmap, what are the supply chain issues? Can you elaborate on some of these, please?
Okay. In the 2010 roadmap, there was a supply chain challenge, specifically the availability of heavy forging components. And that was considered to be a bottleneck for the industry. Since 2010, and already at that time, there was a lot of investments in manufacturing capacities. And today, there's actually an overcapacity of those heavy components. So there is no more this bottleneck aspect in the supply chain. What is needed, though, is to continue improving standardization and to achieve a good balance between a global supply chain and local supply chains. You know that when countries buy nuclear power plants, there is always a certain share of the work that has to be carried out in the country. And so there is a balance to be reached between the local supply chain and with the necessity to qualify that supply chain and a more standardized global supply chain. So the barriers are more the management of this balance between global and local supply chain and the continued need to improve standardization across and codes and standards across the supply chain.
Okay, thank you, Henri. Another question. Current nuclear power is optimized for base load production at maximum capacity with only little flexibility to adapt to demand. How will future designs be adapted or re-optimized for more flexibility in the presence of large fractions of variable renewable wind and solar energy? Or would this drive the electricity production cost up too much?
Well, what is perhaps not known very well is that the current generation of reactors already have some load-following capacity, even though some countries do not operate their nuclear power plants in that manner, and they only operate them as baseload providers. But France and Germany, for instance, have for decades now the experience of operating nuclear power plants in load-following manner. In the requirements for the new generation of nuclear reactors, for example, European utilities requirements, there are flexibility requirements that are set, and all the new designs satisfy these flexibility requirements. But of course, nuclear power plants will not be as flexible as, for instance, gas generation capacity generation in those future markets. So there is a need, certainly, to prepare for the operation of nuclear power plants in electricity markets with very high shares of variable renewables, and that's the challenge on the operation side.
Okay, thank you. Another question: how much scoping exists to increase the lives, capacity, and availability of existing nuclear power plants?
Well, some countries, especially the United States, are leading the way in terms of lifetime extensions. More than 70 U.S. reactors have had licenses to operate for an additional 20 years to 60 years. There is research ongoing on looking at even longer lifetimes, like 80 years. And we do have a case study in the roadmap on long-term operation and the research that is accompanying and supporting long-term operation. Main issues are with materials, material research, because the limit to the life extension of reactors are those components that can't be replaced. Otherwise, if you can replace a component in a nuclear power plant, then it is replaced, like steam generators, for instance. But there are some components that cannot be replaced: the containment, the pressure vessel, etc. So these are the limits.
Thank you, Henri. Thank you to the audience. We have a very active audience here. The questions are coming in thick and fast. Here's another one. What do you recommend concerning the challenge of making the transition from generic R&D on fast reactors to the establishment of industrial-scale commercialization? How to manage the transition successfully?
So what we have said is that there is ongoing research in developing generation 4 reactors and designs. There will be a prototype testing in the next decade or so, and we see that there could be commercial generation 4 reactors available from, let's say, 2030, 2040 onwards. There will not be a full transition from the current generation 3 light water reactors to generation 4 reactors. We see more generation 4 reactors being constructed in the electricity system to provide additional services, for example, on the minimization of waste. So there will be this dual parallel development of generation 4 with newer and evolving generation 3 water-cooled reactors. But what is important is that after the construction and the prototype, the construction of prototypes and their operation, there is enough time to take the lessons learned from the operation of those reactors to improve the designs of generation 4 reactors. They will only come into the market if they are satisfying the safety requirements at the time of their deployment. They have to be economical or more economical than other competing sources of energy. So there's a lot of issues and challenges still ahead for the development of such reactors.
Continuing on, what are the requirements for a country if it wants to reliably and safely operate, whether it be Gen 2, 3, or 4, 3+ small modular reactors? Is it irresponsible to recommend nuclear for developing countries at this time?
I think every country has the right to develop nuclear energy in their country, but of course there are a number of recommendations on how to do that. The roadmap indicates, for example, the milestone approach of the IAEA, which recommends setting up the necessary infrastructures, also addressing the need to have trained and skilled workforce to operate future reactors, to man the regulatory offices, also skills in supporting infrastructures like research, education, and training. So there is a whole process to be followed. It's a long process. It requires a lot of commitment from governments that want to develop nuclear power. There are a number of case studies, for example, the UAE, which has been developing nuclear power and is currently constructing a large nuclear power plant with 4 units, 3 under construction today, and a number of recommendations to be followed. It's not a light investment. It's a long-term investment. It requires a lot of resources to get the infrastructure and the skilled workforce ready to operate nuclear power in the country.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we're running a little low on time here. There are lots of questions to be answered yet, but there will be efforts made to answer them by email later on or on the site. So maybe we'll close with just one more to the IEA. It seems that new plants will be mainly built in regulated power systems. Does the International Energy Agency see that over the long term, major changes need to be made to the governance, ownership of power generating plants as a necessary condition to achieve the low carbon targets? Is it acceptable to address this issue with member governments? What one action would the authors recommend as a priority for getting the construction and connection rates up to that required by the 2DS?
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. In terms of major changes in ownership structures of generation plants, we're not foreseeing that we need to see any significant changes in terms of ownership. I think what is key in terms of encouraging nuclear investments at the rate that we need to see in the 2-degree scenario really comes down to governments providing that clear, stable, long-term framework for attracting investments in nuclear power. Governments need to maintain or clarify their strategies for nuclear. We also need to see, in terms of what industry needs to do, a demonstration on the part of industry that they can build on time and to budget. The challenges that are facing nuclear are quite significant, but we do see that there are solutions in many different aspects. If we focus on financing, we have the UK contract for differences, which is effective to a long-term power purchase agreement, providing the assurance necessary to make those investments in nuclear power. We are optimistic, if you look at historical build rates, that we can achieve the targets set out in the 2-degree scenario. But it will be a challenge that will require the cooperation and collaboration of governments and industry, but also across countries to achieve such an ambitious target.
Thank you very much for that response. At this time, we're going to have to close off this session. I'd like to thank the heads of the 2 agencies for taking part in this launch, and of course thank the authors for their presence and their presentation and answering many of the questions. And thanks to all of you for tuning in and taking part in this session. Once again, we didn't get to all the questions that were asked, but there will be efforts made to answer these questions. Yes, Cecilia?
We just want to say one final word, which is to thank all of the experts who participated with us in the process of developing this roadmap. The messages, the findings from this report really are a collaborative effort from the different stakeholders which engaged with us in the development of this nuclear roadmap.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, that brings this session to a close.